You know, I became interested in cars before I can even remember nearly. My father was a rural mail carrier in East Texas, and my first memories are that I liked to ride around with him in a Willis Overland, and then he got a 28 Whippet. And when I was 4 or 5 years old, I used to ride around with him and stand up on the floorboard on the right side and go, "Faster, Daddy." I loved, and my father loved cars too. In Texas, you could get your driver's license when you were 14 years old. And my father had a 34 Dodge, which, let's see, that would be, I was 11 years old. That was a 3-year-old car. Well, I got my driver's license. The day after I got my driver's license, I asked Dad, I said, could I drive the car around the block? And I took it out on a street. The best street around there was a street called East Pike, which was a 4-lane road then. And I got stopped for doing 80 miles an hour in a 34 Dodge, and it was a little while before I got to drive again. When I was 12 years old, I used to get on my bicycle and go out to the local racetracks. There were no drag strips then, but we had what we call the local bull rings, which were, most of them were half-mile and 1-mile track down there. And I can remember the names to this day of the guys that were, you know, the local drivers at the time. And I used to go down and hang around at a garage a little bit. There's a fellow named Gene Fredericks that I remember down on Columbia, and I had a garage, and I used to go down there and hang around, just peek around outside, and I wish I could go in there and sit in a race car. And one time he'd let me come in there and sit in it, and I used to get on my bicycle and go out to these races every Sunday. I loved racing from very early, you know, my earliest childhood. They found a heart condition when I was about 8 years old. The school nurse found a murmur, and I wasn't allowed to do any physical exercise. I couldn't play soccer. I'd have to sneak off to play baseball a little bit, and I was a runt. I was 5 feet 5 inches tall when I went into the service at 18 years old, and a year later, six months later, I was nearly 6 feet tall. So I always thought that my family fed me good, but evidently something happened as soon as I got in the service, because I sprung up very, very quickly, and I passed the examination to go into the service. They didn't find any heart murmur or anything, and it didn't return until 20 years later. Oh, I had a family, and I tried to go into business, and I went into several businesses that could have been very successful, but some way, I think I was a little dyslexic, and another thing is I have an attention span deficit, and back then they didn't diagnose these things, and I get very bored with things very quickly. I'll start something and get it going, and it'll have a lot of potential, and I'll turn around and say, hell, that's boring. I've walked away from more situations that could have been very successful than you can imagine. And that's the reason that I decided, well, I've always wanted to drive race cars. I think I'll just try it. So I started, a friend of mine had an MG, and we started building a car in my garage in Dallas. And rightfully so, my wife at the present time says, I don't know whether you're getting that car out of here, or you and the car are getting out of here. I drove for a team that was not very well known then, but it's very well known now, Aston Martin. And a fellow named John Wire was the team manager. And I used to hang around the factory where they were building the cars, as well as driving, going out and testing. Hanging around those factories, seeing how things were put together and how little companies operated really is the thing that gave me the insight of how to put the Cobra together and the cars that I've done since then. So that was really, I wanted to drive race cars. I enjoyed driving race cars, but I also knew that I'd started late in life. I started when I was 28, so I better get on with it and decide what I was going to do when that was over. Because if you look back over the life of a lot of race drivers, when their days are over, a lot of them are looking for something to do, and I didn't want to wind up in that category. Ferrari made me an offer in 50, 56, 57, and 58 to drive for him. And I never wanted to drive for Mr. Ferrari because the drivers, if you'll talk to Fangio and Phil Hill and Tony Brooks and if Peter Collins were here, he kind of pitted the drivers against each other, and I didn't want that environment.
You won at Le Mans. That was Le Mans.
Yeah, yeah.
How did that feel?
It felt wonderful. Aston Martin never quite had the horsepower. The Ferraris were always quicker down the straights. But we had wonderful preparation, probably better preparation than Ferrari had at the time. And I was lucky enough to win it, and that was really the high point of my life as far as driving race cars up to that time. So I already had heart problems then, and I was having to drive with nitroglycerin pill, but not very much at Le Mans in '59. The next year, 1960, when I won the national championship, I had to take 4 or 5 nitroglycerin pills every race. So I decided that at the end of 1960, I'd never planned it, but I just was driving at Laguna Seca, and I took about my 5th nitroglycerin pill, and I could have won the race, except I had to slow down for 2 laps every time I took a nitroglycerin pill because it knocks the top of your head off. Did you ever take one? Take one sometime. It really hurts the top of your head. What it does is breaks your capillaries down and gets more oxygen in your system, basically. But I was driving around. I said, well, I think I'll quit. Time to go try to build a car. I nearly had a deal with Corvette in 1957. In fact, I took 3 Corvettes. Ed Cole gave me 3 Corvettes. I took them to Italy and had Scaglietti build the bodies for them. And we were about halfway through it, and I got a call one night from Ed Cole and said, Shelby, I never gave you those cars. Forget about it. Says, Zora Duntov, who was one of my dear, dear friends, and McKenzie, who was in charge of the Corvette program, had gotten to the chairman, found out about it, and stopped the program. General Motors wasn't interested in me building a sport car that would blow off the Corvettes. So along in 1961, I was thinking of buying Corvette engines just through a dealership and building my prototypes, or using the little aluminum Oldsmobile engine. And I drew up 3 or 4 plans for chassis. And suddenly I read in a magazine that AC Cars in England had lost their contract. They'd stopped building the Bristol engine, which was actually designed by BMW years before. And they were looking for an engine supplier. They're using a 6-cylinder Ford. But then Ray Brock of Hot Rod Magazine came down to the shop one day, right after I'd moved to California, and says, Carroll, I was back in Detroit, and I saw a new little thin wall cast iron engine that Ford was building. So he put me in touch with a guy to call it Ford, and I was selling Goodyear racing tires. I was the distributor. and I had to go to Pikes Peak to the hill climb. And the people from Ford were there, and I talked to him, and I said, "Hey, you have a new engine, and I have an idea for a sport car that will blow off the Corvettes." So he asked me to come back to Detroit, and this was before I'd even made a deal with AC Cars. So I put him off. I got on an airplane, went to England, and I said to the AC people, I said, "If I can get an American V8 engine, would you be interested in building me a couple of prototypes and putting them in?" And they said yes, they would. So I got on the airplane, went straight back to Detroit, and met with Don Fry and a couple of other people there at Ford. And they took me to Icoca, who was sales manager of the Ford division then. And I said, "You have a new little engine here, and if you will furnish me a few engines and give me $25,000, I can build you a sport car that'll blow off the Corvette." And I'm told, and I don't know whether this is so or not, but they laughed about it and told me sometime a year later, says, "Icoca said, you better give that guy $25,000 before he bites somebody." It was an archaic chassis. It was 20 years old then. And when we wound up with that car, not one nut and bolt was in it that AC had originally put in it. It had the same design, two archaic old buggy springs, one at the front and one at the back, but even they were different lengths. The A-arms, all the stuff was different. If we'd been smart, we would have designed a new chassis. But we were time restricted, financially restricted. And Phil Remington and a bunch of California hot rodders took this thing, and we started developing it and made it work, and wound up, I think it won the national championship in production cars for about 7 or 8 years. We did a bunch of Playboy ads. Ford decided that they had never advertised in Playboy, and they wanted to, so they wanted to see if I could get my head chopped off. They got me to advertise in Playboy. And that was what it really was to see if it was feasible, if the right thing for them to do advertising. And they decided not to, by the way. That was the first automobile ad ever in Playboy, and I don't think they advertise in Playboy up till today, do they? The youngsters talked about it at home all the time, I think, was the thing that I'm sure a lot of mothers and fathers really got disgusted to listening about this, this new sport car at home. But you'd be surprised, I'm surprised every day at the number of 50-year-old people now that'll come up and say, you were my idol. When I was a kid, when I was in school, I wanted a Cobra so bad, and I've got one now. Look there, I had to pay $300,000 for it, but I've got it. And I guess that's what started the whole thing. There was a little girl that came into my office that was about 5 feet tall one day, and she says, "I want to buy a Cobra." I says, "Honey, you're not old enough to buy a Cobra. How old are you?" She says, "I'm 17, and I have the money to buy a Cobra." I thought, this is a little strange here. So I took her in the office, and we started talking, and her name was Carol Connors, and she says, "I'm a songwriter," and says, "I wrote a song, To Know Him Is to Love Him," and says, "I have enough money to buy a Cobra." I said, "But you're not old enough to buy a Cobra. You have to bring your mother with you." So she brought her little mother in that was about 5 feet tall, and her little brother. And her mother didn't want her to buy the car, but it was her money. She had earned it, and she said, I want to write a song about my Cobra. So I says, that'd be fine. I never thought that it would amount to anything. 6 months later, this song had come out, and it went to #1, actually #1 in the country, and was there 1 week before the Beatles came over here and knocked it flat. And I don't like the Beatles this day.
You don't carry a grudge.
Though we had hot rodders from England, from Switzerland, from France, from Japan, Australia, New Zealand, people from all over the world really wanted to work for this little company. And I've never seen a company that had as high a morale. Everybody would work. It wasn't uncommon for them to stay there till 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning and be back down there at 7:30 the next morning. That wasn't uncommon at all. Everybody was just hyper to go try to beat Ferrari then. So we built the first Daytona Coupe. It wasn't significantly better, but we were better organized at that time. You know, if you remember, Ferrari wasn't too well organized for their pit work. Their cars were probably as fast as ours, but and our cars were heavier, but we were just as fast down the straightaway, but we were hell on the brakes. And Phil Remington devised a process where we could change the brake rotors in 20 seconds. And we changed brake rotors probably 6 times during the race. Our brakes would never have held out. That, more than anything else, won the race for us. That was the little edge that we had that Ferrari never knew about. Lee Iacocca called me one day and he says, Shelby, I want you to come back and talk to me about building a hot Mustang. And I thought, oh, no, this is a secretary's car. Sells for $23.95. And so I rode back there and I got on the airplane, went back. And what had happened, the people at Ford in the racing department had gone to the Sport Car Club of America, and he says, we're going to make a sport car out of the Mustang. Well, sport cars were accepted as 2-place cars then. The Mustang was a 4-place car, 4-seater. And it says, we're going to turn this into a sport car. Well, it wasn't a sport car. And the people at the Sport Car Club of America said, no, it's not a sport car. You can't do this. So Iacocca wasn't a real performance nut back there. In fact, he didn't like to spend his money on race. He thought we were wasting our money on a lot of the programs in racing. But he wanted me to build this Mustang. So I went back to Sport Car Club of America. I said, what do I have to do to make this damn thing a sport car? I says, I got orders to do this. And they said, well, I'm glad you asked me, Shelby. These people from Ford came back and told us what they were going to do, and said it just didn't ring true. Says, so they says, put bigger brakes on it. Put a racing suspension on it. Hop the engine up. Take the back seats out. Make it a sport car. Put a roll cage in it. I said, okay, that sounds reasonable. So we hired a fellow named Chuck Cantwell, an engineer, and he and Ken Miles in 60 days had the thing running. We had a budget of $2,500 to do it. Got it done. And took it out and tested it, and sure enough, it'll blow the Corvettes off. So We built 500 cars first year, 1965, and built about 20 of them as racing versions. And they sold like hotcakes to these guys that wanted to go race against the Corvettes that couldn't afford the Cobras. We sold them for, I think, $39.95, which was about $1,000 premium over the regular Corvettes, which you can see things were a lot cheaper there racing than it is now. The next year, 66, we built 1,700 cars. The next year we built 5,000. The next year we built something between 5,000 and 6,000. Everybody was a renegade at Shelby. Everybody did three men's work. That was the reason it was such a successful little company. I like to build cars. That's it. I've never in my life, money only means to me is, all it means to me is that I'm not starving to death, and it enables me to do what I want to do in life. So you got to have enough of it to do that. The rest of it's wasted because you're not going to take it with you anyway. My father was a wonderful man. He loved automobiles. He died at a very early age. Most of the things that I've ever done in my life, I've thought about, I just wish Dad was here to see it. As far as inspiration is concerned, I have a lot of heroes, people that I look up to, but it's people that I look up to, a lot of different ones for different reasons. Because when you really get down to it, not any of us can do everything. A lot of people I've run into think they can do everything. But I think the most important thing that I've ever learned is learn what you can't do. And that's the thing that I try to live by and not try to overreach. I tried to overreach a lot of times in my life. But if you know what you can't do, you won't go too far wrong.